First of all, who here is actually from the regions? Oh, that's good. If you're all from Auckland to Wellington, my pitch mightn't go down so well. Look, I tell you what, after coming from a beautiful, fine Napier this morning, having a late flight, I suspect that one of the best economic development policies would be to move Parliament from Wellington to Hawke's Bay. But I'm struggling to get that past Grant Robinson, to be honest.
Now look, Stuart, there's a problem with that, and that the Parliament might end up on top of wine vineyards, and we certainly wouldn't want that, would we? Because it would spread out, wouldn't it?
Imagine vineyards, beautiful sunshine and nice beaches. Couldn't have that. Hey, look, contrary to the 2014 report released by the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, regional New Zealand is not failing. You know that. Zombie towns aren't appearing on the horizon, and those of us who live in the provinces certainly don't class ourselves as failures. In fact, often the opposite is true. I can't imagine why anyone would want to spend hours in traffic rather than precious time with friends and family. As someone who made a conscious decision to move out of Auckland and back to the regions, back to Hawke's Bay after 25 years away, few things annoy me more, to be honest, than consultants who drive to work along clogged motorways to pay their $1 million mortgages to write reports informing us that the regions are in trouble. You know, if you listen or read to too many of these, you'd start believing that provincial New Zealand is in a death spiral and provincial ghost towns are an inevitable part of the evolution of 21st century progress. Nor, however, do I accept the proposal or the scenario by Professor Spoonley. Is he here at all? Oh, that's good. of Massey University, that regions like Hawke's Bay should exploit their their competitive advantage of beautiful fine weather and good infrastructure and become retirement villages catering to those at the end of their lives. The interesting thing about the aforementioned reports, and no doubt a lot of you have read some of these, and on the state of the provinces, they very rarely highlight the incredible success stories that come out of the regions. And why they are successful. Rather, what they do is they tend to seek examples of why things are failing or they're not working. It's a shame because it ignores the reality that many companies are actually taking on the world from the regions and doing incredibly well without the fixed costs and horrendous overheads that weigh them down like an albatross around their necks. However, I do acknowledge that more good provincial stories should be out there, and the reasons and the rationale to relocate from big cities like Auckland to the regions are growing. Certainly the economic reasons, let alone the lifestyle reasons, have always been there. Innovation is a key to sustainable success, and not just business innovation, but also in local and central government policy, planning and development, employment offerings, and what constitutes success and excellence. I must say, who here works for a territorial authority? And what about one of the regional economic development agencies? Okay. I think I've done a lot of research on this. My role, as Colin said, is economic development, but it includes regional economic development. And the last speaker said that sometimes people operate in selfish means. Well, I do. I've got 4 kids living in Napier. I'm one of 4. I'm the only one who's gone back. I want my kids to go out and see the world and return. And there have got to be opportunities in the Bay that aren't there at the moment. So if that's selfish, so be it. But I want to see the regions flourishing. But what most of these reports don't identify is that any initiative to drive growth must come from the regions themselves. And if necessary, supported by central government, rather than a prescribed set of solutions from central government that are dictated to so-called grateful regions. And my point, I suppose, and I'd be interested in your feedback on this, but my point is that if provincial councils don't start doing things differently, they will end up with the same results they always have had. But worse, they'll be continuously disappointed because they perceive to be central government inaction. And I know every time there is a budget, you get mayors from provincial cities throwing up their hands and saying, there's nothing in here for the regions. And you know what? It's time for the country's provincial areas to clearly identify their own regional competitive advantage, and each region has it. You guys know what yours is. And then take control of their own future without waiting for centrally planned solutions and funding from the government. Now, before you jump up, before any mayor or CEO or regional economic development person jumps up and wants to contradict me, I do acknowledge that 6 of the 9 regions have delivered Regional Economic Development Strategy document and a Regional Economic Development Action Plan to MB. In Napier, Minister Joyce came and launched ours, even though the government had absolutely nothing to do with it. But this was the third plan I have seen since being back in the Bay in 10 years. My point is that it's easy to write these plans. The difficult part is implementing them. And it's why Labor has said that every EDA that has a plan submitted to MB will be able to access $350,000 over 2 years to help operationalise those recommendations. And you won't need to write a really complex plan just to get that money. We understand that it is hard and sometimes it needs a serious set of competencies to start operationalising the good stories in these plans. To say that there is an opportunity for consultants who understand regional economic development, government relations, and have competencies around how to write business cases on how to leverage opportunity by identifying competitive advantages is a real understatement. There is government money available. There will be more government money available. You just got to know how to access it. To be honest, and I don't know, have you had anyone from the National Party speak here at all, Colin?
No, Simon Bridges was announcing the regional plan in Taranaki yesterday, so he wasn't here, and Susan did seek other possibility substitutes, but they didn't come up with someone. So
they're all preparing CVs because some of them mightn't have jobs after the election. But to be honest, it's hard to disagree with some of the government's 6 key regional economic development areas that it wants to see addressed as part of its business growth agenda. Investment, export markets, innovation, skilled and safe workplaces, natural resources, infrastructure. We all want that. The current government's definition of economic success is something that a Labor-led government could absolutely embrace. A market-based economy that reflects Kiwi attributes of agility, resourcefulness, innovation, world-beating. An economy where all regions and our people have the opportunity to grow and prosper. We are one of the these are the national lines, by the way, we are one of the most highly skilled countries in the world. Our businesses add greater value to their goods and services. We are more internationally connected. I love those. We all love them. We all should strive for them. It's very hard to disagree with them. But by and large, I would argue that the government has actually failed to deliver on any of these aspirational targets. So despite their 8-year business growth agenda, New Zealand companies still lag behind their global competitors. And certainly economies of a similar size in terms of labour productivity, investment in research and development, commercialising innovation, international engagement, and the ability to scale up to a global level. So what are we going to do about it? I suppose that's what you're here to hear, aren't you? Under Labor, the type of regional economic development strategy under consideration, it has to deliver some key outcomes. That would not have been possible if a strategy had not been in place. And by this I mean that subsidising industries, companies, developments or innovations that would have been self-funded is corporate welfare at its worst, and I don't think it's a great use of taxpayer money. And there are a number of examples of this which I won't mention, but you're probably aware of some of them. In terms of the issue identification, the issues that this Regional Economic Development Plan is seeking to resolve are divided into 2 sections. I'll deal with the first one mainly, but the first one deals with immediate issues, while the second longer term. So the immediate issues that I see are lack of access to internationally competitive capital, poor research and development and investment, Auckland capture, and poor infrastructure. And by that I mean not necessarily roads and ports, I'm talking about fibre. Medium to long term, we've got to address our poor labour productivity rates, our lack of ability to scale up, poor international engagement and inability to commercialise innovation. But let's deal with those short-term ones first. The primary concern that I believe is operating in 21st century New Zealand is the lack of access to affordable capital without onerous restrictions on its use. Even though commercial lending rates are some of the lowest for recent memory, compared to international competitors, the cost of money in New Zealand is high, and the ratios required by the banking system are too onerous to justify large-scale investment to develop that will either create jobs or improve productivity or both. So what we tend to do is overvalue labour and undervalue capital. Now this has fantastic short-term labour market outcomes, but very poor long-term productivity and often longevity outcomes. You know, under the last Labor government, we had the second lowest level of employment in the OECD behind South Korea. And it's fantastic when the economy's booming and the global economy is going gangbusters. But when things tighten, we realise we're not that competitive and a whole lot of these companies close down. It's not the future that I think we need to be in. So firms or organisations that might, under different circumstances, undertake due diligence on a potential development opportunity that would drive productivity simply won't, because the cost of capital is too high and too restrictive in New Zealand. I don't know if you remember, I think it was 2007, 2008, Fisher and Paykel closed down an assembly plant in Mosgiel that employed 400 people. First response is 400 people? That's going to create havoc in a town like Mosgiel. The second response is, why the hell have we got an assembly plant employing 400 people? You know, we should be a country that has a plant 3 times that size employing 40 people. I mean, 400 people, that's what we think of China, to be honest. And we'd be wrong if we did. What Labor's economic program will seek to address is the lack of access to affordable capital, because by addressing this issue, I think a Labor government can help the private sector overcome the one barrier to entry that is inhibiting economic development. But the main outcome that we're seeking to address through regional economic development strategies are these. Employment. If we're going to put money in, taxpayers' money in, we've got to see the creation of sustainable jobs, direct and indirect, over and above those that would be created without intervention. Economic stimulus. I mean, you've got to have growth in provincial economies in the way that delivers sustainable wealth to the region, and again, in a way that would not have been achieved without innovation. Investment in either innovative technologies, encouraging commercialisation of technologies, or key infrastructure that enables a level of growth that otherwise would not occur without the project's completion. Productivity, a meaning increase in the level of capital assets that drive productivity and thus competitiveness, and therefore increasing the chances of long-term global and domestic profitability and employment sustainability. And just as important is social. We want to revitalise provincial New Zealand in a way that mitigates the social cost of growing regional unemployment and disenfranchisement. You know, as mentioned, I'm one of 4 children to come back to the Bay. My other 3 brothers and sisters are all well educated, and they would love to come back as well, but they say there aren't the sort of jobs that they do in Hawke's Bay. They're wrong, actually, but that's their perception, and their perception becomes their reality. And finally, I think we need to address the Auckland phenomena, providing enough of an incentive for Auckland-based companies to either relocate to the regions or certainly to invest in the regions in a way that they would not have had such investments been in place. Incentives, I should say, been in place. So let me talk about an economic development strategy framework. We've earmarked $200 million over our first term to invest in firms that meet out the criteria set out below. That contrasts with the $40 million from the national government. But there's an assumption here. There are 3 ways in which the government can address the capital issue. 2 of them I favour and will support, and the third I have a philosophical objection to, but I haven't ruled it out. We haven't ruled it out. First one is give money away. You can give grants. Second one is you can finance low interest loans through debt, or third one, you can take a shareholding stake. Now, let's start with the grants. You know, we as the taxpayer have given away $900 million in business grants over the last 3 years. In my view, there has to be an extremely compelling business case before the government should give money to the private sector company in the knowledge that the company will use taxpayers' funds to create profits for private shareholders, and especially in instances where such a gift provides a competitive advantage to the recipient over other participants in the same market or industry. And actually, this is where perhaps using the tax system is a lot fairer. But I'm philosophically against grants. Let's talk about low interest loans. How long have I got, mate? Is there a clock here I can take a look at? Oh, yeah, no, that's all good. Another 10, thanks. MB does provide loans for research and development along with regional economic investment groups, but certainly not on this scale. So when I'm talking about the $200 million, I'm not saying any portion is earmarked for any of these 3 things. I would love to see $200 million invested in equity and in low interest loans, but if it means we've got to give out some grants, then so be it. But let me, again, talk through this. So low interest loans, MB does give these out. what they'd be done is at the rate of inflation. There was an organisation that did do a little bit of this. Some of you might remember, I probably shouldn't mention its name, it's called the Development Finance Corporation. Didn't end too well for that thing. But if you read about the DFC, they went way outside their mandate. And actually it was set up for the very purpose to invest in companies because the government at the time didn't think there was enough venture capital or growth capital out there. How this would work is the government would offer loans at the rate of inflation. So let's assume inflation is 2%, and let's assume the government can borrow at 4%. And if the total amount was lent out, so $200 million was lent out, the annual cost of the government would be about $4 million, not much, or less than 2% of the amount the Callaghan Fund gave out in 2016 alone. It should be noted that these loans are for proven companies, so this isn't venture capital. Say $10 million in annual revenue seeking to expand, with preference given to companies that are developing offshore markets. If you've developed an offshore market and you want to grow that market, that's even better. This is not for high-risk startups or early-stage companies. So seed as opposed to venture capital. Equity stake. Now, I ran this past a friend of mine about 5 years ago, and she was aghast. How dare the government think that they can take a shareholding in a company? You don't have to. We're not forcing you to. Currently, the Venture Investment Fund and the Seed Co-Investment Fund are funded by the government to invest in high-risk, early-stage companies. The rumour is that both of these are actually going to be folded into the Callaghan Fund. Now, I'm not too sure if that's been confirmed, but that's certainly the rumour out there. But investments are made either directly or indirectly through intermediaries like Movac, Pioneer, Pink Arrow, Direct Capital, etc. The difference between the proposal on the table and VIF or the Seed Co-Investment Fund is threefold. First of all, the government would not be an angel investor. The business risk profile would be less risky, and the aim is significantly different. This is sourcing and providing competencies to fulfil specific gaps and providing a measure of credibility and certainty in international markets. Now, let me talk you through this. Let's say a company is gearing up for export or is in an export market, and they want to minimise their cost of failure. Let's also make an assumption there is a war for talent in New Zealand, and I absolutely believe that's right. But we've got this free trade agreement with China, and yet the number of people who know the Chinese market or can work in the Chinese market is minimal. We haven't got the number of people who know that market well enough to, I believe, take advantage of the opportunities. So the government would inject money in exchange for equity. They would then provide operational staff, as is required, reporting to the CE, not to the government, reporting to the CE, who had the skills required to identify these competency gaps. In exchange for equity, the government would get at least one member on the board. A major advantage, and this has been tested, okay, so this isn't me interviewing my typewriter, it has been tested, is when heading to China, for example, and someone asks, who are your shareholders? You can say Bill, Bob, Joan, Jane, and the New Zealand government. And it provides a level of credibility that is very hard to come by, or in many cases just does not exist. And the difference with something like VIF is at some point in time when the board has determined that the organisational skills that the government equity provided were no longer necessary, the government would sell its stake at the current market rate. I mean, why should the government give money to companies that they can only get the bond rate back like VIF? Or why should we be giving money to companies as a grant when they go out and make a substantial profit and a number of times sell that and pocket it themselves? So the other thing I just want to talk about briefly, and I have got 3 minutes?
No, you've got no minutes.
1 minute. Let me wrap up then, and I'll take a question about ICT in the regions. Does that sound fair? Okay. Okay. So I just want to say, I mean, I'm preaching to the reports of death in the regions are more than somewhat premature. I mean, if we are really to drive growth and opportunity in the regions, two things must happen. First of all, the regions need to take control of their own future. I firmly believe that, and it can happen. And the other thing is government needs to come on board with innovative ways to fund organisations that will allow them to grow, expand, provide employment, and and basically do the great things we know can be done from the region.